Good morning everyone, welcome back to Strength and Conditioning for Karate. I'm Trevor and today we're going to go through the principles of strength training. Initially I planned to go through a number of different training exercises that you could do for strength training. However, it's become to my attention that there seems to be a lack of a true understanding of how wide strength training is, and we sort of encompass anything to do with our muscles as strength training. And although that's correct, we can break down strength training into a number of different areas, and how we apply those areas or how we train in those areas is critical to our development for our overall performance. Now, with every sort of exercise, my favorite term is always laying down the foundations. And it's the same with when we do strength training. Now initially, or when we talk about strength training, there are 4 areas that we will train for. One of them, or the first one, is muscular endurance. That is increasing the efficiency of our muscles to contract and produce a force over a repeated number of sets or repetitions for an extended period of time. And that's generally the first area that we look to when we begin strength training, is building up our muscular endurance. Now when we train that, we're looking to do, in general, above 15 repetitions in each of our sets. So with that construct, and to give an example of those would be squat kicks or push-ups. So again, the next phase, and that would be our first phase that we go into. Our next area that we could train for is referred to as hypertrophy. Now this is where you are looking to grow muscle, build muscle. Would we want to focus on this in karate? Probably not. Primarily is if you build up a lot of muscle, you're going to get bigger and stronger, but you're also going to get heavier. Now as speed and power is an important facet of karate, we don't want to be too big because that will actually slow us down. Now people will say, oh yeah, but football players are very fast and they're very big, and that is correct. However, the difference in speed comes down to tenths of seconds or even hundreds of seconds the higher you go up. So if you have someone who is trained and they are quite quick against someone who is trained and very big and strong, that person who is not as big will generally be quicker. It comes down to Newton's law of inertia or motion. So have a look at those 3 laws to explain it. So hypertrophy, generally we're working between 8 to 12 reps. If you go into a gym and into the weight area, that's what the vast majority of people in the weights area are training for. They're lifting a lot of weights, they're doing a lot of sets, high volume, because they want to go big and muscular. Now, if you've never done any resistance training, then possibly you would go into hypertrophy for this period of time, just to add some muscle, because muscle is good. You don't have to put on a lot of muscle, and you won't in a short period of time. But it will help by increasing some muscle, increasing the cross-sectional area of your muscle as well. Then there's our next facet of training that we can look to, and that is strength training. Now there's 2 terms for strength training. One is relative strength and the other is absolute strength. Now relative strength is in relation to your strength with your body. So if you've got a person weighing 80 kilos and a person weighing 100 kilos and they both do 2 reps benching 100 kilos, the relative strength for the 80 kilo is greater than for the 100 kilo, because the 80 kilo person is lifting more than their body weight, whereas the 100 kilo person is lifting their body weight. So that's what how we compare relative strength. Now you have the 180 kilo guy lifting 100 kilos. It would also be if the 100 kilo guy was lifting 110. And when you look at that, the 80 kilo guy is lifting 20% above his body weight, so he is still relatively stronger than the 100 kilo is only lifting 10% above his body weight. However, absolute strength is the 100 kilo guy, because he is still able to produce more force and lift more weight, and that is absolute strength. So it depends on what you're looking for to develop, absolute strength or relative strength. Absolute strength is important if in direct competition, such as big, strong people, pushing, shoving, grabbing, if technique is the same, of course, will generally win. However, relative is when people move quick and fast. So a person who has relative strength, a greater relative strength, will generally also be able to elicit greater body to weight power ratios. And that leads to our next component, power training. Now, power is probably the most important facet of resistance training or strength training for karate. So should we do the other three components or just go straight into power? There's two arguments to the story, and my personal position is you need to develop a solid foundation first before you go into power. And one of the reasons for this is reducing the risk or minimizing the risk of injury. Now, power is high explosive work. Now, we start talking about plyometric training, ballistic movements, Olympic lifts. So with the higher intensity of the activity, the greater the risk of injury, particularly soft tissue injuries. So by doing the foundation first, we can reduce that risk. So how could we apply it to our training? Now, first of all, before you were to do resistance training, you still want to speak to an allied health professional or your doctor and check that resistance training is okay for you. You may have injuries or medical conditions that would advise against it. So make sure you check that first before you go, oh, I know, I'm going to start lifting some weights. So when we look to it and start with someone, and if we're looking at someone who is a novice trainer, never done any real resistance work before, you'd start off and go, let's do 4 weeks of muscular endurance training. And that is to build up the muscle contractions, build up the efficiency, and to work on your technique. Because the one thing is, never sacrifice your technique for how much you lift. In other words, quality of the lift, not quantity of the lift, is more beneficial. So you'd do 4 weeks of endurance training and you'd progressively overload for those 4 weeks. Now that could mean that you start off by doing 10 push-ups, and you might do 3 or 4 sets or 2 to 4 sets of 10 push-ups, some 10 body weight squats. And you do that twice a week. And the reason why you do it twice a week is it allows for recovery and then adaptation, which is referred to as supercompensation, and occurs 48 hours to 72 hours post-exercise. So that's why we stretch it out to 3 days. So you're doing it twice a week and you're building it up. And what I mean by building it up or progressively overloading is how we continue to improve our fitness. You might start off and do 3 sets of 10 push-ups. The second time you train that week, you might do 3 sets of 11 push-ups. Then the next time, 12, then 13, then 14, then 15 push-ups. And that's how you've built up, and you progressively overload. Because remember, our body will adapt to fatiguing or to reaching that point of failure. So if we don't then go beyond that, eventually the body will provide more for us, then realize that, oops, we don't need this much because we're not fatiguing anymore, and start to take back or detrain. So that's why we want to add a little bit more each time. And you'll do that for 4 weeks. Then I would, if you're again a novice, I'd go into 4 weeks of hypertrophy training. Now this is where you train a little bit heavier. And you might be doing push-ups with resistance bands. You might be doing push-ups with your feet elevated, or if you've got a little school bag, putting a few kilos in the school bag and doing push-ups with them on you, sitting nicely and snugly on your back, or if you've got machine weights or resistance band, building it up that way. Now you're only looking to do 8 to 12 reps in that range, but it's important that if you're doing 8 reps, you're getting to a point of near fatigue at those 8 reps. It's no good I'm doing hypertrophy and you've been doing 15 push-ups and then you go, oh, today I just have to do 8 push-ups at the same level. That's not going to work. You lift heavier. As the number of reps decrease, your weight increases, or the load should increase. And you'll do that. And again, twice a week. And you can do that legs, back, chest. You're only going to worry about the major muscle groups. These people want to do, oh, I've got to do some biceps. Don't worry about doing your biceps or your triceps. They will develop when you do your major muscle groups, the chest, the back, the legs, and your core. And that's our hypertrophy, building up our size, increasing. Now after 4 weeks of that, We would then go back to 4 weeks of endurance training. One, it's to give our tendons and ligaments a chance to recover because they adapt slower than our muscle tissue does. So they are still adapting and recovering, and we go back and do 4 weeks of endurance. Now, having done the hypertrophy, we will be a little bit stronger. So we might be able to start at 15 and pump it up to 20 reps of our push-ups. Same principle. And then I would look to go back to 4 weeks of hypertrophy training. Now, if you're a yellow belt or an orange belt, or even a green belt and a blue belt, no problems with doing this. This is the start of your journey towards a black belt. So you do 4 weeks of endurance, 4 weeks of hypertrophy, 4 weeks of endurance, 4 weeks of hypertrophy, that's 16 weeks, 3.5 to 4 months of training. And then you wouldn't need to do hypertrophy training again. For a while anyway, for at least a year probably in karate, because hypertrophy, we don't want to get too much size. But after that 4 months, you're at a fairly solid base of muscle development. So what I would then look to do is strength training. Now, strength training, the main adaptation with strength training is neural adaptation, is that it's eliciting the body to contract all your available motor units, all your muscle at once. So a simple term is, I remember reading that the bicep has around 400,000 muscle fibers. But if you don't do resistance work, general populations may only have 200,000 muscle fibers active. So the neural adaptation in strength training is to turn on those other 200,000 muscle fibers. It's the same with all of them in your muscle groups. So hypertrophy, yes, you haven't worked to your maximal level, your maximum strength level. So you're not necessarily activating all your motor units, all your muscle fibers within that muscle group. So by doing strength training, we're going to switch them all on. See, again, the brain, it's really good at working out what we need and do we need more. Now, to do strength training, generally you are not lifting more than 5 reps. And the reason for that is if you're starting doing more than 5 reps, then the load is not heavy enough. This is again why we say you need that strong strength background, because the load is going to be quite heavy. You've had at least 4 months to develop your technique and also to build up the strength of your muscle system. So you'd then do 4 weeks of strength training, and that is training 3 to 5 reps. Well, there's a couple of different methods of that. There's the Lomode method, which dates back to the 50s, which is you start off with 10 reps, then you do 7, then you do 5, then you do 3, then you do 1 rep. There's a more modern take of that, which is a 5-3-1, which is for 1 week you lift 5 reps. The next week you lift 3 reps, and then the following week you're only lifting 1 rep. And when I say 1 rep, that is the maximum amount you can lift once. That is true absolute strength training. With general populations, we probably wouldn't go to that extent until you've got probably 2 years of training. So you probably work around 3 to 5 reps. Still a heavy load, still going to elicit that big strength improvement. Again, you're going to have bigger rest periods. Now, after the strength cycle of 4 weeks, I would go back to endurance training for 4 weeks. Again, to give your ligaments and your tendons that adaptation process, but also to help or provide an opportunity for your body to recover. Because when you do strength training, you are lifting maximal loads each time, and it is quite draining on the body. So we'll do that for 4 weeks. 4 weeks endurance training. I'll then go back to 4 weeks of strength training. So again, we're now out to 8 to 9 months of training, and we haven't even got to power, have we? Hang on, power. But power's all about, karate's all about power. It is, but if you're a Q grader, power is going to come eventually. But in your cues, you need to work on your technique and developing that foundation. The foundation for your body systems, the foundation of your technique, until you get to your shot and hold. And then you start training for your dance. Then we start looking at power. So we've done that. We've done strength for 4 weeks, endurance for 4 weeks, and then strength for 4 weeks. Now I would look at introducing you to power. And And again, power, explosive movements. It includes plyometrics, Olympic lifts, and applying light weights. But the one thing is, if we go strength training where we're lifting 1 RM, the maximum we can, when we're doing power training, we're only lifting initially 30 to 40% of that load. So we can do things like we call box jumps, clap push-ups is a power, uses the chest, medicine ball, where you throw medicine balls. And these are all explosive actions. And for it to truly be power, it needs to be explosive. So we probably train for a year and we finally get to power work. And then we'll cycle through a period of endurance training, power, strength training, endurance training, power, along those lines. And we may not do 4 weeks. We may only do a week of strength training every 3 months, purely to initiate the brain to stimulate and activate all our motor units, all our available muscle fibers. So as I said, that is the basis of strength training, and how we can sit there and look at the 4 different modes of strength training to develop for our karate. Now, especially as a Q grade, if you're going to spend 2 to 5 years before you get to your Shodan Hon, that's an ample time to really develop your muscle system, to advance or develop yourself to be able in the best position to really advance your power. Now, in the next couple of videos, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide some examples of ways we can train both endurance, hypertrophy, strength and power, and how we can incorporate it into our karate training. Because the one thing that everyone's always spoken about is that with karate training or with everything else, I don't have time to do all of this. So we're going to look at a way in how we can incorporate this sort of training into our karate training. So make sure you subscribe to the video and hit that notification indication. Apparently it looks like a bell. So a couple of 10-year-olds have told me. They know all this new computer voodoo science. Have a look at that, and that way you can stay up to date. This video is a little bit later, primarily because last week I had my 2nd vaccination shot, and that sort of knocked me about for a day or 2. Right as rain now, so I'll bring out another video a lot quicker, showing you ways we can incorporate our strength training into our karate training. But remember again, we're only talking 5% of our training time should be dedicated to strength and conditioning. So that's how we're going to look at it. How can we do that? Until then, keep up with your karate, keep getting onto the online dojo. Remember the trilogy of workshops. This week we have Kancho delivering one, so get onto that. Last week was Shian Anthony, brilliant session. The week before that, Shian Gavin, again, a couple of extraordinary sessions and perfect opportunities to learn off the very best in Gokan-Ryu. So until then, keep safe, keep your distance, and keep your mask on now if you're in Sydney. Otherwise, we'll see you on our next video, guys. Be well, be safe.